How the military would divide during a civil war. During the American Civil War, the opposing forces were organized to create command and control to ensure a smooth operation within the conflict zone. During the conflict, the structures that were utilized underwent significant transformations as a result of changing trends in strategic thought and the requirements that were imposed by particular circumstances. From the beginning of human history till the present day, the operational deployment of organized armies, as opposed to loosely regulated battlefield rabbles, has gone through periods of active use and times of inactive use. The American Civil War was responsible for codifying several aspects of Army structure that are still in use today. During the American Civil War, the regiment served as the primary movement unit. They were typically comprised of 1,000 men when they were initially organized, and they were recruited from among the eligible citizens of one or more counties in the surrounding area. The quick reduction of this number would be brought about by the attrition caused by disease, combat, and defection. On both sides, replacements were extremely uncommon. Rather, it was more common for an entirely new regiment to be established as a replacement. Colonels were often the ones in charge of regiments. The formation of a brigade would involve the formation of 2 or more regiments. It is important to note that it was rarely the case for the 3 branches of the Army, infantry, cavalry, and artillery, to be combined inside a single brigade. In a typical brigade, there would be between 3 and 5 regiments, and the brigadier general would be in charge of the brigade organization. To form a division, 2 or more brigades would be formed together. When it came to the Union Army, divisions were often comprised of 2 or 3 brigades with a significantly lower size. There were as many as 5 or 6 brigades that might be included in a Confederate division. The major generals were in charge of the divisions. Through the formation of a corps, 2 or more divisions would be organized. It was common practice for infantry, cavalry, and artillery troops to be included in a corps. The concept behind a corps was that it was a formation that was capable of carrying out operations independently. With the formation of an army, 2 or more corps would be organized. One of the most prevalent misconceptions about the war is that each nation had only one army, while in reality, both nations had many armies on the battlefield. The Army of Northern Virginia, which was commanded by Robert E. Lee for most of the war, and the Army of Tennessee, which was commanded by several different individuals throughout the conflict, are the 2 most well-known Confederate armies. One of Lee's principal adversaries was the Union Army of the Potomac, while other adversaries included the Army of the Cumberland and the Army of the Ohio, both of which operated in the western region. Leadership at the corps and army level was typically established by seniority among the available major generals, or by intervention from Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis. In other words, seniority was the most important factor. There are both problems and solutions. At the beginning of the war, neither side had a strong understanding of which army structure would prove to be the most successful. Furthermore, because neither side anticipated the war to persist for an extended period, there was a certain degree of leeway provided to those who recruited units regardless of how they were formed and delivered them to the front lines. During the war, both sides investigated a wide range of different buildings. One of the most important themes that emerged throughout the development of the forces that fought in the Civil War was the increasing split of the 3 branches. At the beginning of the conflict, it was not unusual to see a brigade that included artillery batteries, infantry regiments, and cavalry regiments. This particular specimen from the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861 is a good example of this. As time went on, leaders on both sides realized that the confusion of responsibility was the root cause of problems on the battlefield. It was established that the efficacy of artillery might be increased by arranging them into units that were both larger and more autonomous. Consequently, by the year 1863, we started to see unified artillery brigades coming into place of individual batteries that were tied to infantry divisions, rather than being haphazardly dispersed over the battlefield by the requirements of lower-level commanders. Artillery could now be centrally directed to maximize its firepower at strategic spots along the main line of defense. A year earlier, the 150-gun bombardment that preceded Pickett's charge at Gettysburg in 1863 would not have been possible from an organizational standpoint. Similar to how infantry began the conflict, cavalry was first linked to brigades or divisions. It is unreasonable to anticipate that cavalry would be able to compete with infantry, considering that they are often armed with weapons that have a shorter range and the lighter caliber than foot soldiers. The commanders in charge did not have a formal education in cavalry tactics, so they made more frequent use of riders as couriers or scouts. Despite this, they continued to have a significant edge in terms of mobility, but they rarely took advantage of it. Sparked by the innovations of cavalrymen such as J.E.B. Stuart and Alfred Pleasonton, an organizational shift towards a unified cavalry force offered the potential for more damaging raids, more effective intelligence gathering, and later in the war, huge formations of horsemen equipped with brand new rapid-firing weaponry that had no equal in the world at the time. In addition, the issue of the chain of command played a role in shaping the war. As seen in the figure above, the hierarchy of authority is arranged in a pyramidal fashion, with the highest level being the chief executive. Before the war began, however, there was a greater tendency for power on a battlefield to flow more horizontally, with more troops operating independently, as was the situation at Bull Run or Wilson's Creek. This was the case because of the fact that more units were operating independently. During both of those conflicts, the Confederate forces that were present on the battlefield were split into two smaller armies, and neither of them had a genuine claim to command the other. This friction caused maneuvers to be slowed down or disrupted, which ultimately resulted in the loss of lives in both engagements. As the conflict progressed, both sides made it a priority to establish the chain of command from the beginning. On a battlefield, this was not always achievable because leaders found themselves constantly being killed or injured. When an officer was killed, his replacement was expected to come from the most senior of his subordinates. For example, a brigadier general would be replaced by the senior colonel in his brigade, the colonel would be replaced by the major, and so on. Therefore, if an officer were to be killed or injured, it would not only result in a grand theoretical reorganization of responsibility, but it would also result in every guy underneath him moving up one level in the chain of command. It is only natural that a colonel who is disoriented and confused in a cloud of gun smoke and is located 1 mile distant from his brigade commander would not immediately be aware of his promotion. Implications for the long term. The advancements that occurred during the Civil War can be directly linked to several aspects of the modern military structure. The headquarters is still the normal location for the deployment of heavy artillery. It is more typical to see heavy artillery formations directed by an autonomous commander. This is even though modern-day infantry units have access to several weaponry systems that were not accessible during the Civil War. One example of this is man-portable mortars. The upkeep of a big cavalry wing that is cohesive, well-equipped, and kept in good condition has proven to be a crucial component in recent American conflicts. Considering that the primary benefit of horses, which was mobility, has been superseded by technological advancements such as airplanes, tanks, and helicopters, the critical efficiency of marrying mobility with firepower has increased significantly. The American Civil War was the impetus for the construction of the first staff school in the United States, which was designed to educate officers in the art of order transmission and execution. The establishment of the United States Colored Troops in 1863, which was the first formal policy regarding the integration of the military, was one of the most significant changes that occurred in the structure of the military. Throughout a little more than a year, more than 10% of the Union Army was comprised of black soldiers. Due to the protracted nature of the Civil War, the United States of America was forced to establish a military that was more severe and efficient than what had been present on the American continent in the past.